My name is Kelsey Connor, and I am going to be doing a presentation on social structure theory for juvenile delinquency. Social structure theories are the body of criminological theories that explore why juvenile crimes occur more often in lower class communities than middle and higher income communities. They include socioeconomic conditions and cultural values as a primary guiding source for understanding juvenile delinquency. The social structure theories have subset theories, which are known as ecological, strain, and subculture theories. Each of these takes a different approach to understanding crime from those two primary guides of socioeconomic conditions and cultural values. The first of these that we are going to look at and talk about is ecological theories, which focus primarily on the environment and the area in which crimes are being committed. The most notable of which is Shaw and McKay's social disorganization theory. The social disorganization theory is truly a product of its time. It was first unearthed and discovered as a product of Chicago circa 1920s emerging effects of growing urbanization, industrialization, and immigration. It was originally theorized by two men named Park and Burgess, who were not looking at it from a criminological perspective, but they were focused on the ecological and geological implications of these factors and how they interacted with native plants and animals and other species native to the land. However, Shaw and McKay took over this theory in 1942 when they stepped on the scene, and they began applying it to the rates of juvenile delinquency and crime in neighborhoods with growing industrialization and immigration. Their studies linked the concepts with the growing urban decay in cities like Chicago, and this led to their development. Their studies linked the concepts of those growing industrialization and immigration and crime with the growing urban decay in cities like Chicago. And this led to the zone theory, which was their own interpretation of the concentric zones that were originally discovered by the founders of the theory. The zone theory divides cities or neighborhoods into 5 zones. The first of these is the factory zone, which is also known as the central business district where most workplaces existed. Right outside of that zone is the zone in transition, which is kind of what's constantly being invaded because the central business district is growing and developing. And so this zone in transition is constantly, it's in transition. The third zone is working people's homes, which is the zone where working people live who have emigrated away from the zone in transition where they used to live. The fourth zone is the residential zone, which is the more suburban and established zone where the more expensive homes are. And the fifth zone and final zone is the commuter's zone, which is where the suburbs are. One central tenet of this theory, as described by a social scientist, is that communities can be characterized along a dimension of organization. So these zones represent that dimension of organization, if you will. It's within the zone in transition that most of the delinquency takes place. And this leads to the concepts of solidarity, cohesion, and integration, which all have relationships with the rate of crime and delinquency. For example, socially organized versus disorganized communities. Socially organized communities had high levels of trust and establishment among neighbors, and socially disorganized communities did not. These socially disorganized communities can be seen by Shaw and McKay as having high cultural heterogeneity, mobility, and poverty. For example, in the zone in transition, cultural heterogeneity was high. Like we said, the zone in transition is where a lot of the delinquency takes place. Cultural heterogeneity is high because people keep immigrating into this zone. And also, they're usually coming from different cultures, especially in urban areas where there is a higher immigrant population. So there's this heterogeneity within cultures, and people had these cultural barriers, communication barriers that really prevented them um, from connecting with neighbors, and caused a lot of families to forfeit the idea of having actual neighborly relationships. Um, Mobility is the high turnover rates in communities that keep people from actually forming or maintaining neighborly relationships. For example, think of it like a job. Jobs that have high turnover rates keep recycling employees. Those are usually the jobs that you want to stay away from because it's really difficult to establish um, any form of a team dynamic or ethic, which is exactly what gets people to stay in the first place. It's what makes a company hireable. Um, and then lastly, there are high rates of poverty in these communities. Statistically, poverty leads to higher rates of delinquency, which was consistent with the findings of Shaw and McKay. This theory has faced some criticism for its application of community characteristics, as they cannot, in and of themselves, lead directly to criminal behavior. In other words, poverty, mobility, and heterogeneity only influence social disorganization, which can cause crime, but these three factors do not cause crime directly. Therefore, the relationship is indirect. It's also difficult to distinguish between social disorganization itself and the effects of social disorganization. So, for example, the delinquency rate of a neighborhood was both social disorganization and the effect of social disorganization, which can be kind of confusing. And to even further this idea, the definitions of neighborhood are fuzzy. What do and do not constitute a neighborhood, according to this theory, are fluid and inconsistent. So that is it for Sean McKay's theory. The next series of social structure theories that I am going to discuss are strain theories. These theories center around the idea that a lack of opportunity or boredom creates more opportunity for criminal behavior, which is what is known as creating strain. Strain theorists argue that American society is built around the idea of financial success being the primary goal of every person. However, not everyone has the same opportunity to partake in this success. The first theory we'll look at is Merton's strain theory. His theory does not just analyze criminals, but society as a whole. He characterizes them under 5 modes of adaptation, or how they adapt to the demands of society. The first is conformity. An individual who conforms is very unlikely to commit crime and is more likely to conform to society by pursuing the goals of economic success through legitimate means. The next is ritualism. This is an interesting one because it rejects the cultural American goal of economic success. However, they still accept the legitimate institutionalized ways of obtaining it. So, lower middle class, they still value education and employment, but are less cutthroat about the financial goal. Innovation is unlike the ritualists. They accept the goal of financial success, but not the means by which they get there. They are innovative. They are likely to commit crime to achieve financial success. They're likely to create their own ways to achieve financial success. And this mode specifically, innovation, is the most likely to lead to delinquency. Retreatism rejects both the goal and the legitimate means to obtain it. So, in other words, they retreat from responsibility. They frequently tend to fall into drug addiction and may commit crimes to support the habit. And then rebels substitute the goals and means, both, with new goals and new means. This is represented by some gangs, militias, cults. Delinquency is likely among rebels. However, it is not as likely among innovation. And the next strain theory is kind of just building off of this other of Merton's, and it's Agnew strain theory. Robert Agnew created the general strain theory in 1992 as sort of an offshoot of Merton's theory, but his whole motivation was to explain why exactly the strain on individuals was likely to produce crime. This is slightly more relevant when applied to youth and juvenile delinquency because their concern with financial success is generally not as high as adult offenders. This is because, they're more concerned with things that are maybe not financial. So he expounded on things beyond financial language. So he organized the concepts into 3 kinds of strain, which are: 1, preventing or threatening someone from achieving their positively valued goals. 2, removing or threatening to remove the positive stimuli that an adolescent possesses. Like, for example, if they lose a boyfriend or girlfriend, like that is going to be very triggering for an adolescent. And then 3 is the present or threaten to present individuals with negatively valued stimuli, or like verbal, physical abuse. These are things that would cause strain in a juvenile. Ultimately, his study concluded that treating people, especially young people, badly just leads a lot of times to them becoming upset, and they respond with aggression, crime, and other deviant behaviors. Agnew refers to strain as relationships in which others are not treating the individual as he or she would like to be treated. In the case of juveniles, anger is more likely to increase their perspective of being wronged or betrayed, which in turn increases the desire for revenge and decreases the ability or desire to have self-control. This theory has been challenged, or both of the strain theories have been challenged, because they really have a lack of empirical evidence. The largest survey sample of this theory was 896 respondents. Some of the other challenges that the surveys have faced is that one of the surveys was a study of all college students, or one survey respondents were not on probation or in treatment for drug addiction, so it wasn't necessarily relevant. And a lot of times these surveys were conducted using non-random subjects, so it didn't produce the kind of results that would prove this theory and give it the the information that it needs to be proven. The other thing is that Merton's strain theory had really largely dissolved by the 1970s, which is why we saw Agnew come in 1992 and actually expound on the ideas. But for the most part, what Merton discussed was pretty much gone by the 1970s. So the last of the social structure theories that I'm going to discuss is subculture theory. So subculture theory is based on the notion that subcultures, which are sets of norms and values that are different from the norms and values of mainstream culture. According to subculture theory, delinquent youth hold values, norms, and beliefs in opposition to those held in the dominant culture. This leaves them exposed to a higher risk of running into the juvenile delinquency system at some point in their youth. So the first of the subculture theories that I'm going to discuss is Cohen's delinquency and frustration theory. The subculture lower class youths in this theory have different social values and norms from middle class youth, but they desire to obtain middle class status. However, there's a disadvantage to that, which Cohen calls the developmental handicap, which hinders their ability to achieve middle class status and eventually perpetuates what is known as status frustration. And these developmental handicaps, such as lack of educational preparation, lead to feelings of immense frustration and inadequacy, which attribute to higher rates of high school dropout. Cohen argued that school failure and frustration motivate these lower class boys specifically to join oppositional subcultures that embrace and reward violence and aggression. Since delinquency is a subculture, one of their values is violence, which can be used in opposition to their conventional peers and teachers or other forms of authority. In other words, they essentially protest the mainstream culture due to their status frustration. And the last theory that I want to take a look at today is Cloward and Olin's differential opportunity theory. This is a very interesting theory. It was derived from the belief that Merton and Cohen's theories on juvenile delinquency were too simplistic. So they get really specific with this one. They were less focused on the small crimes and acts of subculture protest and instead focused on the serious delinquency committed by urban male gang members. Again, very specific. Expounding on the idea of Cohen's theory, they believe that the goal of middle class membership left unschooled, that middle class membership left unestablished, led to the development of delinquent subcultures. Not only are legitimate means of success not available to everyone, but neither are the illegitimate means of success, such as crime mentoring. Very interesting. Illegitimate means, crime mentoring, they're not available to every adolescent. So there's not this equal opportunity. So they're not able to attain middle class status. They argue that although there are illegitimate opportunity structures in many neighborhoods, they're not equally accessible to everyone. So as a result, gangs are formed based on the availability of these illegitimate opportunity structures. They categorize the resulting gangs into three types: criminal, conflict, and retreatist. Criminal gangs are organized and are they're places where young offenders can gain the knowledge or be mentored. This idea of criminal mentorship, they can be mentored by older offenders to become successful in their criminal endeavors. In other words, there are illegitimate opportunity structures. Conflict gangs, on the other hand, do not have illegitimate opportunity structures. As a result, most of the crime is messy or randomized. It is unorganized and it's kind of outburst-like in nature. And then retreatist gangs are where those two ideas kind of meet in the middle. They may exist with or without illegitimate opportunity structures, and they are more likely to commit petty crimes to support bad habits like drug addictions, but they are unwilling to live a life just devoted to successful criminal behavior. These are my references. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and you learned a little bit about new theories today.